Well, over the weekend, protesters descended on Fort Benning, Georgia, to speak out against the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, formerly known as the School of the Americas. The annual protest drew about 1,700 people to the gates outside of Fort Benning. Unlike previous years, though, not a single protester was arrested. This is the 23rd annual gathering, and the message remained the same. That message is to end congressional funding of a military education facility notorious for human rights abuses throughout Latin America. Now, producer of Breaking the Set, Manuel Rapalo, was in Georgia this weekend, and he joins me now. Manny, thank you so much for coming in.
Hi, Megan.
Can you give us some more background on this group, this institute, and what it does?
Sure. WHINSEC, as it's known now, formerly known as School of the Americas, was actually founded in 1946 in Panama, where it was then closed down and moved to Fort Benning, Georgia. Just 2 years later, it was first called the School of the Assassins by people in Panama. It's a notorious school for, over the last 60 years, it's been training soldiers from across Latin America. Upwards of 60,000 soldiers have actually gone through that school and graduated. Some of the most notorious human rights violators in the Western Hemisphere have come out of this school. And over the last, I would say 23 years, there's been protests organized by the School of the Americas Watch in Fort Benning, Georgia. And that's what this protest was. It's just like in years before, drawing thousands of people to the scene against what people see as one of the biggest sources of political instability in the Western Hemisphere.
And Manny, go ahead and explain what this weekend's protests were like. What was the mood? How does it compare to those previous years?
Sure. Like you mentioned earlier, there was upwards of 1,000 people there, no different than years prior. This is an event that does draw in a lot of people every year. This year was a 3-day event from Friday to Sunday. There were workshops, there were demonstrations, there were musical performances. In fact, I got a chance to speak to Rod Stars, who's a performer, hip-hop artist with the hip-hop group Rebel Diaz. I was hoping we could play a quick soundbite of that.
I'm here because I'm from Chile, and 40 years ago, September 11, 1973, there was a military dictatorship that was funded by the CIA, funded by the U.S., and part of that dictatorship was having people tortured and disappeared and incarcerated as political prisoners. And the folks that did that torture were trained here at the School of the Americas, what we call the School of the Assassins. So I'm here to, say that after 40 years, of dictatorship and 40 years of resistance, we are here as survivors of that exile, of that Chilean, dictatorship, and we're here to, keep letting people know that we're going to continue fighting and that we're still here.
Rod represents millions of people that have a very similar message. People in Chile, Argentina, Peru, Honduras, Bolivia, all across Latin America that have some sort of connection with the School of the Americas. And that was certainly the case at this protest. There were people from across the political spectrum, people from all walks of life, well over 1,000 people at the event. And so many had such a personal story to tell, and so many of them were such heartbreaking stories. So really, it was a very moving experience. It was actually kind of encouraging to see so many people of so many different backgrounds coming together, contrasting to what goes on the other side of those gates, which is the training of soldiers that go back to their home countries to commit these horrible atrocities.
Now, Manny, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this has been going on for over 60 years. This institute has been formed and renamed again and moved. But what keeps these people coming back, these protesters, if the name keeps changing, but the practices are essentially, from what you're saying, the same?
Right. I mean, we mentioned that this has been open for, that the protests have been going on for 23 years, yet nothing's changed. The name of the school has changed, but the policies haven't. It's about visibility, Megan. It's about people coming out and saying, look, we are still unhappy about this. And it's an effective strategy. I mean, it's a grassroots effort that's been going on for 23 years, and it's really gaining visibility. And that visibility will eventually, well, the hopes are that it will turn to change. We know that there's a lot of pressure mounting from people within Congress now, because this is gaining the attention of lawmakers. So what's the hope of this is that people will eventually wake up to the idea that this is not good policy. And the problem that we see is that the mainstream media, the corporate media, doesn't really pay attention to this. It was really unfortunate for me walking around the protests this week and not seeing any other camera crew other than independent media there. What we need is the corporate media, all channels, not just foreign outlets like RT, there to cover this, because people need to know what's going on so that people can wake up and really demand a change.
Now, Manny, is there any, you brought it up a little bit earlier about Congress members that are taking notice of this. Is there anything in the legislature moving right now that kind of combats this group?
Yeah, there's a bill in the House right now called H.R. 2989. It's the Latin American Military Training Review Act of 2013, and what essentially is going on with this act, there's several co-sponsors. There are about 40 co-sponsors, including John Conyers, Keith Ellison, that are essentially asking for a review of the School of the Americas against WHINSEC, temporary closure of the school, and an investigation to look into the connections that this school has with human rights abuses throughout Latin America. And I think that, you know, for someone that's just learning about the School of the Americas today, that hasn't heard about these human rights violations that have been closely associated with this school, they should really look into this more and call Congress and say, look, we support this bill, we support an investigation, we don't want to be involved with human rights abuses abroad, especially if we're paying for them with U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Well, can you explain how much influence this group, this WHINSEC, really has over places in Latin America in its political and military institutions?
Sure. One of the people that I spoke to at the rally, Father Roy Bourgois, he's actually the founder of the School of the Americas Watch. I got a chance to talk to them. I'm hoping we can play a short soundbite of what I spoke to him about.
It's about oppression. It's about men with guns who return to their countries like Honduras and other countries after their training to protect U.S. economic interests, to exploit the cheap labor and the natural resources.
And I think Father Bourgois really hits the nail on the head with this. The U.S. in the past has used the School of the Americas, you know, in the 40s and 50s and 60s as a way to counter the socialist movements in Latin America. It's since evolved into counter-narcotics operations. But really what's going on in the case of Honduras in 2009, for example, there was a coup against the Democrat-elected president who was more closely aligned with the socialist bloc in Latin America. Those responsible for the coup were all trained, if not graduates, from the School of the Americas. So this is one of many examples. Another one is Efrain Rios Montt in Guatemala, to show that it's U.S. interests above, you know, the public good. And if democracy is in the way, then democracy is often the casualty of that.
Breaking the Set producer Manuel Rapalo, thank you for breaking that all down for us, since you're so good at.